The Seventh Tower by Garth Nix. Book 3, Einar. Chapter 14. It turned out that Adras didn't really know anything about Hazror, except that it wasn't the name of a place, but of a creature. A very bad and truly terrible creature. Like the grassland before it, the desert of blue crystal trees ended suddenly. The border was once again an exact, straight line. On the other side, there was soft yellow sand, piling up into dunes as far as Tal could see. Tal walked over, and his feet sank in halfway to his ankles. The sand was still very hot, even though the sun was setting and it was long past the full heat of the day. Warily, Tal picked a dune that looked to be east from his opposition to the setting sun, and started to trudge. He had gone up and down 2 dunes and was resting at the top of the third, wondering whether to try and camp there for the night, when he saw something flash farther along the ridge of sand. It flashed again, and he realized that it was coming toward him. "Adras!" Tal called. "Watch out!"
"I'm watching,"
rumbled Adras. He'd lost some of the extra water he'd taken on. It had evaporated while crossing the blue crystal desert and now the hot sands, but he was still fat and rather slow to move. Tal raised his sunstone. He wouldn't be caught napping this time. As it drew closer, Tal recognized the creature. It was a thin animal, about the length of his forearm, with long, spindly legs and short forearms. It had a short tail and a long, thin snout. But its most distinctive characteristic was the silvery sheen of its skin. That skin was made up of many tiny armored scales, but they were not like a reptile's. Under its armor, the creature was a mammal. The females even had pouches to carry their young. It was a Samheel semi-dragon. Tal knew of it from the Beastmaker game, but he couldn't remember whether they were aggressive. Samheel semi-dragons were always played for skin, not temper or anything else. He also wasn't sure if there was anything he could do to hurt it. That silver skin was protection against heat as well as weapons, though something sufficiently sharp wielded with enough strength would get through. A 2-handed axe in the hands of a Borzog might be enough. Unfortunately, all Tal had was his sunstone, and Adras. He hoped that Samheel semi-dragons were friendly. This one stopped a few paces away, skidding to a halt on its back legs. It stood upright and waved its paws at Tal's, making skittering noises. "Tch, tch, tch," it said. Tal shook his head. "Adras, do you know what it said?"
"Chich, chich, chich,"
repeated Adras.
"Whatever that means."
"Thanks," said Tal. He should have known better than to ask. The semi-dragon hopped forward and swept the dune clean behind it with its tail. Then it turned around and with one silver claw began to trace a line in the sand. "The Codex!" exclaimed Tal. "I wonder if this is another messenger?" He felt fairly sure it was the Codex using these animals somehow, a confidence reinforced when the semi-dragon looked back at him and traced out the letter C. After that it drew another arrow, pointing east across the sand. Then it drew a key again, but this time it also drew another picture next to it. Something that looked like a pipe, or a tube, with several holes drilled into it. "What's that?" asked Tal. The semi-dragon didn't answer. It stared around in fright, as if it had suddenly found itself aware of its surroundings. Its muscles tensed to jump away. Before it could, a shudder went through its small body. Its eyes clouded, and it settled down. A moment later, it drew another symbol. Tal stared down at the rough mark. It was a musical note, written in the notation the Chosen used to perform in the crystal wood, back in the castle. But what did it mean, a single note all by itself? It was a very high one, too high for Tal or any human to sing or hum. It could only be created by light of the correct color striking the right crystal in the wood. The semi-dragon started to draw something else, but it stopped in mid-motion and shuddered again. This time it did jump away, leaving the last letter or picture unfinished. It looked like an unfinished drawing of a human skull, Tal thought, but it was probably meant to be part of a letter. He wished that the semi-dragon had been able to finish it. Obviously the Codex could only use such animals briefly. Still, it had given him some more information. If only he knew what it meant. He kept thinking about it all as he trudged on, but his thoughts were beginning to wander in the direction of food and shelter for the night. Neither looked likely to appear in this sandy desert. Yet, over the next sand dune, as the last light faded from the sky, Tal did see something that might offer shelter of some kind. A few ruined walls jutted out of the sand in the hollow below him. Just 4 corners, with nothing between them, and no roof overhead. But it would be better than trying to sleep on top of a sand dune. He started down. Adras followed above and behind, muttering something to himself. Tal didn't even try to listen. Closer to the ruins, it became clear that the building had not been a normal house. There were too many stones lying around it, scattered through the sand. It must have been a fortification of some kind, Tal realized. Or else there were a lot of other foundations nearby, buried under the sand. There was also something painted on one of the walls. A sign of some kind. 2 rough circles, one inside the other. In the twilight, it was hard to see what they were painted with, but Tal had a nasty suspicion it was blood. He had never seen the sign before and did not know what it meant, but Adras did. The storm shepherd stopped abruptly and rumbled,
"Beware, this is Hazror's place."
"What?" asked Tal. "This room?" "Yes," said a voice that was soft and strangely childlike. It issued out of the ground, seemingly from several places at once. The sand in front of Tal suddenly started to shift sideways, as if moved by a giant invisible hand. In a few seconds, it had cleared away to reveal stone steps going down. A long way down. "Come in," said the voice. It sounded strangely familiar to Tal, though not in a reassuring way. Like the voice of someone he knew, but disturbingly altered. He peered down at the newly revealed steps. The sand was being held back by walls of light, very similar to the ones that Epid had used to hold back the water when he'd helped Tal escape from the pit back in the castle. Tal looked at the light walls very carefully, noting the flecks of color. It was mostly yellow, but occasionally blue. Whoever was making these walls appear had a powerful sunstone, and was very good at using it. Better than Epid, because there was no sand leaking through these walls. Hazror must be a chosen. If the walls collapsed while Tal was down there, he would have no way out, unless he could move the sand back himself. Tal considered that prospect. He thought he could build himself a tunnel of light through the sand, if he had to. He took a step forward, onto the steps.
"Don't go,"
Adras pleaded. He wrung his hands together and a couple of buckets of water fell down, narrowly missing Tal.
"Hazror will eat you, then I will be eaten too."
"Don't be ridiculous," said Tal, though he said it with more confidence than he felt. He indicated the walls of light that lined the steps. "Hazror has to be a chosen. We don't eat people. Besides, I don't have a choice. I have to find the codex." He started down the steps. Then he looked back and said, "Stay there until I come back." He looked back again when he was halfway down, and saw the walls of light close in behind him. Sand poured back down. On the surface, there was no sign of the stairs or of Tal. There was only sand, ruins, and a cloud that spun around in a circle, crying,
"I told you not to go."